Carlton House glowed against the winter dark, its windows burning like constellations above St. James's Park, where frost silvered the paths and carriages queued with disciplined patience. Inside, chandeliers cascaded light upon marble, silk, and expectation, and every breath of music reminded the assembled guests that rank ruled all. It was a night designed to impress princes and intimidate lesser souls, a theater where missteps became legends, and silence could wound deeper than insult. Tonight, destiny waited among the polished tables, attentive servants, and watchful eyes that measured worth without mercy or apology, smiling while calculating ruin with practiced ease. Lady Eleanor Harcourt entered quietly, as though silence might render her invisible, yet invisibility was denied her now. She had returned from a year of rural seclusion, carrying a reputation bruised but unbroken, a woman whispered about rather than welcomed. As companion to a widowed marchioness, she stood present yet peripheral, adorned plainly by necessity, her grace sharpened by restraint. Once, she had been nearly chosen. Now, she was observed like a cautionary tale, proof that affection faltered when ambition spoke. Still, Eleanor held her head steady, dignity learned through loss, eyes open to danger, heart disciplined against hope itself. Across the hall, the Duke of Ashbourne stood composed, his bearing immaculate, his isolation unmistakable. He possessed that authority which required no announcement, the quiet gravity of a man accustomed to obedience. Titles clung to him like well-tailored cloth, yet power had not softened his gaze. By declining certain alliances, he had displeased influential men, earning courtesy laced with threat. Politics shadowed his steps, and loyalty was weighed like coin. He noticed Eleanor not as rumor, but as presence, recognition stirring behind practiced indifference, a memory buried, yet alive enough to ache beneath formality and restraint he wore so well. Eleanor's attention drifted where it ought not, drawn by instinct rather than design. She had learned to observe quietly, for survival demanded awareness. At the long banquet table, crystal caught firelight, and servants moved with rehearsed precision. A misalignment arrested her eye. A decanter placed wrongly, a glance exchanged too swiftly, a hand lingering where it need not. Eleanor recalled country kitchens, whispered cautions, the bitter almond scent once described by a traveling physician. Her breath tightened, reason warring with fear. Intervention promised disgrace. Silence risked death. She looked to the Duke's glass, lifted time narrowing to that fragile instant. Music swelled, violins smoothing conversation into civility as the Duke raised the glass. Eleanor moved before thought could retreat. She leaned close, her voice scarcely sound. "Don't drink that," she breathed, and her hand struck crystal, red wine spilling across linen. The room stilled. Shock rippled outward, swift and merciless. Eyes turned, judgment sharpened. Eleanor straightened, prepared for dismissal, her name already dissolving into rumor. Yet the Duke did not recoil. He studied her face, saw terror mastered by resolve. He took her trembling hand, anchoring her before them all, authority closing like armor around her courage. He spoke softly. Only Eleanor heard the three words he offered, measured and irrevocable. Their meaning settled within her, steadying her pulse. Aloud, he addressed the table, dismissing clumsiness with courtesy edged by command. Laughter returned. Servants cleaned, music resumed, yet the night had shifted. Eleanor remained beside him, protected yet exposed, the weight of his hand lingering. She understood then that safety carried a cost. Association bound her to his enemies, to a world where accidents were engineered. Still, something warmer than fear stirred. The Duke released her, but his eyes followed, intent unhidden. For the first time since exile, hope dared. Whispers resumed with greater hunger, shaped now by spectacle. Eleanor felt them press against her, yet she walked on, spine straight. The Marchioness murmured concern, gratitude thinly veiled by calculation. To be noticed by a duke was perilous. Eleanor retired to the edge of the room, seeking air. There, amid palms and marble, she allowed breath to slow. Memory stirred, recalling earlier tenderness, promises abandoned without explanation. The duke's voice echoed still. 3 words cannot be undone. Neither could the danger they summoned. Yet resolve grew, and bright. Eleanor would not cower. If fate demanded witness, she would endure. From across the hall, Ashbourne observed, aware that restraint now risked cowardice. He had chosen distance, believing withdrawal mercy. Watching Eleanor stand alone, he recognized the cost of that choice. Power shielded him from insult, not consequence. His enemies would exploit this moment, twisting honor into liability. Yet something steadier than ambition guided him. The night required courage, not calculation. He signaled for his carriage, intention forming. Eleanor must not leave unguarded. Protection would invite scrutiny, but absence would condemn. The Duke accepted the risk, recognizing that love, once named, demanded defense. He straightened, resolve firm. This story had begun. Eleanor felt the shift before she saw it. The Duke's attention moved like a current, undeniable. A servant approached, bearing a message delivered with politeness. She was requested to remain. Not commanded, not dismissed. Remain. The words settled heavily. It promised neither safety nor escape. Eleanor weighed her options, finding none gentle. Leaving invited speculation, staying invited peril. She chose presence. As the banquet drew on, conversation edged toward politics, alliances, names spoken carefully. Eleanor listened, learning how easily lives were bartered. She understood then why the Duke stood apart, why courage offended those invested in control. Understanding bound her. Near midnight, the first guest departed, cloaks drawn against cold. Eleanor waited, heart steadying through resolve. She sensed the banquet's end would not release her. When the Duke approached, conversation yielded, space opening around them. He did not touch her, yet his presence enclosed. "You did a brave thing," he said, voice low. The simplicity of praise warmed more than flattery. Eleanor inclined her head, accepting neither absolution nor debt. Courage required no witness. Their exchange ended unfinished, but promise lingered. Outside, snow began to fall, softening the city. Eleanor followed her patron, knowing this night would pursue her beyond. The carriage ride felt longer than miles allowed. London slept, unaware of choices made under chandeliers. Eleanor replayed the moment endlessly, the spill, the words, the hand. Fear visited then passed. She considered retreat, but retreat had already claimed too much. Whatever followed would be faced upright. At her lodgings, she paused, listening to distant wheels. Somewhere, Ashbourne moved with intention. Their paths, once divided, now curved close. Eleanor removed her gloves, staining revealed. Wine-marked silk, a visible reminder. She smiled, but real. Survival was not subtle. It demanded spectacle. Tonight had proven her capable. Tomorrow would test them. Dawn would arrive unchanged, but Eleanor sensed herself altered. The Duke's 3 words remained unspoken to others, yet they shaped her course. She lay awake, aware that protection had been offered, not security. To accept it meant choosing uncertainty. Eleanor chose it. The banquet had revealed the cost of silence, the power of action. As sleep finally claimed her, resolve settled like armor. This story, born in spilled wine, would demand loyalty, courage, and loss. It also promised something to be seen, believed, and defended. Winter held London, but Eleanor faced it unafraid, knowing the night was only beginning. After the banquet, London did not sleep, it watched. By morning, the incident had acquired embroidery. Eleanor's whispered warning recast as flirtation or folly, the Duke's intervention alternately gallant or reckless. She walked beneath these stories as one walks beneath rain, feeling each drop, yet refusing to run. The Marchioness received callers with measured composure, presenting Eleanor as indispensable rather than disgraced. This protection was pragmatic, not tender, and Eleanor understood the bargain. Gratitude must be quiet. Visibility must be earned. Still, she sensed another shield moving beyond drawing rooms, quieter, firmer, placed by a hand she knew. It came first as absence. No rebuke arrived. No invitation was withdrawn. Then a parcel appeared at dusk, unmarked, delivered by a footman who would not meet her eye. Within lay a shawl of deep blue wool, warm without ostentation, the sort chosen by a man who understood winters and discretion. Eleanor held it, fingers lingering, recognizing care where none could be declared. She did not ask its source. Asking would diminish it. Wearing it would invite conjecture. She folded it away, resolving to keep warmth close and speculation distant, though both seemed intent on finding her. Days unfolded with deliberate pace. Eleanor learned to listen, to measure pauses, to read the spaces between sentences where danger often resided. She heard of the Duke's composure, his steady attendance at council dinners, his refusal to entertain questions. She heard also of unease among those who had expected compliance. One name surfaced too often, attached to smiles that failed the eyes. Eleanor catalogued these details not as intrigue, but as warning. Courage had bound her to a man with enemies, and enemies did not forgive interference. Yet she did not regret the spill. Regret would have been a heavier stain. They met again where propriety could be maintained by shadows. A gallery at the Marchioness's house offered statues and distance. Ashbourne approached without haste, his expression reserved, yet relief passed across it when he saw her well. Their conversation was brief, precise. He spoke of vigilance, of altered habits. She spoke of nothing beyond courtesy. Yet meaning threaded between them, bright and controlled. Before departing, he inclined his head, a courtesy rendered intimate by restraint. Eleanor watched him leave, aware that protection, once begun, was not easily ended, nor should it be. The second token came disguised as obligation. An invitation arrived, engraved and official, to a small assembly sanctioned by the Prince Regent. Eleanor should not have been included. Her presence would be questioned. The Marchioness accepted on her behalf, satisfaction thinly veiled. Attendance promised scrutiny, yet refusal would confirm rumor. Eleanor prepared herself carefully, choosing simplicity over display. As the carriage turned through streets lit by gas and expectation, she felt the weight of eyes already upon her, measuring what had changed. She did not look for the Duke. She did not need to. He found her regardless, not with touch, but with attention. Conversation arranged itself so that he stood within hearing, his voice low, his remarks unremarkable. Eleanor felt steadied by this proximity, aware that courage sometimes took the form of shared silence. Later, when music rose and couples moved, he did not ask her to dance. Asking would provoke. Restraint protected them both. Yet when she faltered briefly, overwhelmed by whispers, his hand steadied her elbow, fleeting as a promise. It was enough. The night passed without incident, which in London meant victory. Afterward, rain followed her carriage, tapping like a reminder. Eleanor allowed herself one thought she had refused, gratitude sharpened by affection. She remembered earlier days when affection had been offered, then withdrawn. The memory no longer cut, it instructed. She understood now the cost of his refusal, the calculus that had governed it. Understanding did not absolve pain, but it softened it. When next they spoke alone, she would not plead. Pleading would reduce them both. She resolved instead to speak plainly, trusting courage to receive courage. The opportunity arrived unannounced, as opportunities often did. A sudden storm ended an evening early, guests dispersing in haste. Eleanor lingered, knowing the Marchioness would excuse a delay. Ashbourne appeared at her side, as though summoned by the weather itself. They took shelter beneath a colonnade, rain tracing silver lines between stone and night. Here, distance narrowed without scandal. He spoke first, acknowledging the poison, the misplacement, the intention. His voice held anger contained by discipline. Eleanor answered with truth, not fear. She had recognized danger and acted. That was all. He thanked her, formally, then abandoned formality. The words he offered were measured yet bare. He told her of a year spent choosing duty over desire, believing absence kinder than compromise. He admitted misjudgment. Eleanor listened, heart steady, refusing interruption. When he finished, she spoke once. She would not be hidden again. Protection must not resemble erasure. If his regard demanded secrecy without honor, she would decline it. The rain softened, as if listening. Ashbourne inclined his head, accepting terms not negotiated but earned. Between these movements, Eleanor felt the city pressing closer, its curiosity sharpening into appetite. At calls and teas, glances lingered too long, compliments carried barbs, and sympathy arrived rehearsed. She answered with calm, knowing composure unsettled those who expected collapse. The Marchioness observed this with approval, investing further in Eleanor's usefulness. Lessons in influence emerged: when to speak, when to withhold, how to let another reveal too much. Eleanor learned quickly, not from ambition, but from necessity. Survival refined her. Ashbourne, meanwhile, tightened his circle. Invitations declined were as telling as those accepted. He shifted patronage, withdrew favors, and made no explanations. Such moves were noticed. Men who smiled at dinners recalculated. The cost of independence rose, yet he paid it without complaint. In quiet moments, he considered Eleanor's insistence on honor, recognizing its justice. Protection without respect was merely possession. He would not repeat that sin. Still, the machinery he had set in motion resisted reversal. Expectations hardened, propelled by convenience and fear of disorder. To defy them would demand spectacle greater than a spilled glass. When news of the expected engagement reached Eleanor, it arrived not as a blow but as a test. She weighed what she had gained: voice, clarity, resolve. These could not be surrendered, regardless of outcome. She prepared for the coming assembly as one prepares for weather, neither defiant nor resigned. If asked to withdraw, she would stand. If invited to fade, she would be seen. Courage, she had learned, did not announce itself. It waited, patient until summoned. Hay parted with understanding rather than promise. Days later, rumor shifted, sharpening its aim. Eleanor learned of an expected announcement, a match advantageous and inevitable, whispered with confidence. The name attached was carefully chosen. The Duke's silence was interpreted as consent. Eleanor felt the news without collapse. She had asked for truth. Truth had arrived. That night, she took the blue shawl from its place and wrapped it about her shoulders. Warmth steadied her resolve. If choice remained, it would be made soon. If not, she would endure again, but this time awake. The city waited, and so did she, unafraid, as the next assembly approached with dangerous certainty. The final assembly gathered beneath a quieter brilliance, fewer chandeliers, yet sharper scrutiny, as though London itself leaned closer to witness resolution. Eleanor arrived composed, the blue shawl folded away, her attire chosen not to impress but to endure. She understood now that spectacle was a language others wielded. She would answer with steadiness. The room acknowledged her with a pause. She neither invited nor resisted. Conversations thinned as she passed. She felt neither shame nor triumph, only readiness. Whatever verdict society delivered tonight, she would meet it without retreat, having learned that dignity survived even when affection faltered. Ashbourne entered later, alone. His presence altered the air, drawing eyes that measured consequence rather than curiosity. He moved with the assurance of a man who had reached decision and accepted its cost. When greetings were offered, he returned them briefly, declining to linger. Eleanor watched him from across the room, recognizing a familiar restraint refined into purpose. There was no signal exchanged, no reassurance sought. What remained between them required no confirmation. The expectation of announcement pressed upon the gathering, carried by murmurs that anticipated alignment and relief. London favored endings that preserved its order. When the Prince Regent's representative called for attention, the hum subsided. Words of welcome were offered, obligations praised, stability invoked. Eleanor listened without illusion. She felt the old ache stir, not as wound but as memory, and allowed it to pass. Ashbourne stepped forward when invited, the movement decisive. He spoke calmly, his voice carrying without force. He acknowledged duty, gratitude, the privileges he held. Then he refused what was expected. He named no rival, offered no justification beyond conscience. He declared his intention to choose without negotiation, to bind his future where his honor already resided. Silence followed, dense and instructive. Eleanor felt it gather, aware that attention had shifted toward her without permission. Ashbourne turned then, his gaze finding her unerringly. He crossed the space between them, each step counted. When he spoke her name, it was neither plea nor command. He asked publicly what he had earned privately, whether she would accept a life shaped by consequence rather than convenience. The question held no ornament. Eleanor answered with clarity born of endurance. She would, not as refuge, not as prize, but as partner in choice. The words settled, irrevocable. Reaction came swiftly, layered and uneven. Some faces tightened with disapproval, others softened with reluctant admiration. Power recalculated. The regent's representative measured response, choosing restraint over rupture. The moment passed without applause, yet its weight remained. Ashbourne did not claim victory. He offered Eleanor his arm, and she took it, aware that union here meant departure from favor elsewhere. Together they acknowledged the room, then turned away. No carriage waited to herald triumph. Only resolve accompanied them, steady and sufficient. Outside, the night held frost and quiet. Eleanor breathed deeply, the air sharp but clean. She felt altered, not elevated, grounded instead in certainty. Ashbourne spoke then, not of sacrifice but of future, naming what he would relinquish without bitterness. Certain privileges would fade, certain doors would close. Yet he spoke also of freedom, of mornings ungoverned by calculation. Eleanor listened, recognizing that love here was not escape but alignment. She answered with her own terms, naming boundaries, naming trust. They walked, unhurried, as equals discovering shared pace. In the weeks that followed, London adjusted. Invitations thinned, then reappeared, cautious and revised. Some friendships dissolved quietly. Others emerged unexpected. Eleanor learned to navigate a narrower path, her worth no longer debated but observed. Ashbourne withdrew from certain councils, accepted others, his influence altered but intact. He did not regret the shift. Their household formed gradually, without haste, guided by mutual regard. The blue shawl found its place beside the hearth, not as token, but as reminder of vigilance rewarded. One evening, months later, they returned briefly to Carlton House for a small gathering, necessity rather than desire. The chandeliers shone as before, yet the space felt changed. Eleanor walked unremarked, not invisible but settled. Ashbourne stood at her side, his hand offered without ceremony. No one whispered of poison or scandal now. The story had moved on, as stories do, leaving behind those who lived it. Eleanor looked once at the table where wine had spilled, then away. Courage had been demanded and given. Love had endured its testing. As they departed, snow began to fall, softening edges, quieting the city. Eleanor watched flakes gather, each small, each sufficient. She understood that history would not record her name, nor his refusal, yet meaning did not require record. It required choice, repeated and upheld. Ashbourne met her gaze, no words needed. Together they stepped into winter, not unmarked, but unafraid, having claimed a life shaped by loyalty rather than fear. The night closed behind them, complete.